Never loud enough. Guys, tonight we're going to talk about the 2018 to 2022 Honda Accord. As a disclaimer before this, this install could be used in virtually any four-door sedan with a similar layout. This particular install requires 6.5s in all the factory locations. It's going to be really, really easy to move this into a car that's similar in its layout. I went through and studied this car quite a bit, and I think I have a pretty good idea for what would sound good in this car. So let's get started. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos in this series, you know that I always start out with my drivers because the rest of the system needs to be built tailored to those drivers. However, I'm going to start prior to the drivers in this particular video. I'm going to start with sound deadening. Okay, so in any car audio install, all of them, no matter what you're doing, sound deadening is a key player in getting the best out of your overall system. And when I say system, that also includes the body and the interior panels of the car. The car is part of the system. And if you don't believe me, try setting everything up in the parking lot and seeing how it sounds, and then put it in a car and see how it sounds. Completely different. The car's interior is part of the system, just like the sub enclosure is part of the subwoofer system. All of this stuff works together. So we want to do a basic sound deadening, minimal, in any location where you're going to mount any driver. Okay, aside from a tweeter. Tweeter doesn't necessarily need that, although it can't hurt, because the sound deadening can also stop vibrations which are naturally occurring, or also stop panels from vibrating from bass that's occurring inside the vehicle. Even if the driver itself isn't the cause of the vibration, the deadener will stop that vibration, or at least subdue it. And having said that, there are many types of sound deadener. Everybody's most familiar with is the butyl covered metal substrate adhesive sound deadener, which is essentially like a mass loading. So if you take a little piece of this and put it on a bell, the bell won't ring anymore, because it adds mass to the material, and that mass, the added mass, makes the material have a much lower vibrating frequency. So for example, if you look at the swing and you put a kid on the swing, the kid's going to have a certain amount of weight, and the swing is going to swing at a certain frequency they're going to want to swing. And if you push them at that frequency, they'll get bigger and bigger and bigger. But if you try to push them at any other frequency, they're just going to jiggle on the end of the chain. It's not going to work. Okay, that frequency that they're wanting to swing, that timing is their inert frequency. Now, if you put an adult in that seat with them on the swing, now they're going to have a much slower frequency, because there's a lot more mass. And anytime you load mass onto something, it's going to lower its innate frequency that it wants to vibrate. So mass loading is always good. Then you have other material that's like a foam-based material that's much squishier, and that works good to block sound. So that's more of a sound blocker. If you're wanting to keep the sound from outside to getting inside, that type of material is what you would use. You will find that in newer cars, in the doors, over the big holes in the metal, you'll find a big heavy piece of that type of material a lot of times. Back in the day, 90s and before, there may not be anything in there at all. And in some cases, you just have like a piece of plastic with tape on it that holds it in place. That's just a moisture barrier, not the same thing. More modern vehicles, they've incorporated in that moisture barrier, they've incorporated a sound deadening mat, which keeps a lot of sound from coming through to inside the car. This can be incorporated into that membrane, that butyl metal adhesive membrane that you put on. You can also add a layer of that foam to it, and usually you find that called something like Luxury Liner or Luxury Liner Pro or something to that effect. And what that does is it not only stops the vibrations or lowers the frequency that they'll vibrate to something that's much lower than any frequency you'll ever play, and it also blocks sound. So having both of those together is a good thing. Usually costs a little bit. However, you can go on the internets and find inexpensive sound deadening butyl foil sheets to handle that mass loading, and also inexpensive foam barriers with adhesive also to do all of the other stuff. And you can use that foam barrier stuff. If you cut little pieces of it, you can use that to wrap around your little clips that hold the door on, wrap around rattly bits and things that make vibrating noises. Those are excellent. That's an excellent way to kill those little rattles. So when you're in your door putting the drivers in, take the time to sound deaden the exterior panel of the door, the interior frame, and especially around the driver and behind where the driver is going to be. And then get you some foam or some foam tape or some Tessa tape or some medical bandages, whatever you've got that's got a nice squishiness to it. And just go around and wrap it around little clips and little bobs that make vibrating noises. Tap them and see if they make noises. If they do, make it so that they stop making those noises. Take your time and do that door, the whole thing. In the end, your ear will appreciate the effort that you put into spending an hour or two just going around and killing little rattles and clicks in the door, where wires touch the metal, where little, all that stuff. Just make sure nothing makes any noises. That's what you want. Now, with this amplifier setup that we're putting in this car, we're going to need an alt gauge wiring harness. So, and we're only going to use one amplifier, so one alt gauge wiring harness is totally fine. And if we're doing a factory install, we're going to need probably, I would say, just 20 feet of 9-wire. And just Google 9-wire, and you'll find a round insulating thing with 9 little wires inside of it. That's what you're looking for. You're going to probably want about 20 feet of that just to have enough to do both trips with the 9-wire. Beyond that, you'll need, with the factory stereo, you'll need 3 sets of RCAs or one 5-channel RCA. Or if you don't know whether your car has a factory amplifier or not, and you don't know where to tap into it, that's easy. For one, you can go to an expert and let them put it in for you. Or, and what I would suggest, is going to Crutchfield to order these parts. Most of this stuff is to be had at Crutchfield. Crutchfield will automatically include the speaker brackets to mount the speakers and the locations for your car, specifically for this Honda. And well, if you put in your car, it's going to give you the locations for your car. It also gives you the parts, the adapters, the little wiring harnesses to go from the factory speaker wiring harness to be able to connect to the spade terminals for these speakers. And most importantly, it gives you instructions on how to do all that. So Crutchfield is the go-to place for information. All right, so now let's start with the drivers. All right, so what I chose was a newer driver on the market from AudioControl, the PNW-65. These are point source drivers. And if you listen to me talk about things before, you know that I tend to like coaxial drivers. When because they give you the tweeter and the mid-range in the same spot, which ends up pleasing the ear easier than trying to locate a tweeter up high and with the woofer located wherever it can go. When you separate those, you have to do a lot of work to get that signal back to where it's pinpointed at your ear. Having them in the same location severely reduces the amount of work and sloppiness that you'll have to work your way through to get the sound you're looking for. So I like using point source. Point source just eliminates a lot of problems. And these are point source, meaning they've actually located the tweeter deep in the cone, right in the center of the cone, right where the signal will be the same distance from your ear as the highs and the mids, but the same distance, coming from exactly the same spot. So you only have to worry about time aligning one driver to get both of them time aligned. It's a brilliant thing. And the quality on these things looks to be bang on. If AudioControl's reputation is to be believed, and they've got a long-standing reputation for quality, I would say these are excellent, and they're going to do a great job. A couple of the key things that got my attention was the poly mica-coated woofers. That's a big deal. That's a very, very rigid structure that's also very light. And anytime you get light and rigid together, that's going to make a good driver cone. And they have a double roll surround. Now the surround on a mid driver doesn't seem like it's going to be a big deal, but believe me, it is a huge deal. You think about it like this: when you're moving that driver piston, okay, if that surround, which is out here, has enough room to allow that cone to linearly stay the same as it moves, then it's going to reproduce that sound wave perfectly. If it doesn't, if it's stretching tight here and it's making the cone flex like this as it moves, then you're going to wind up with a lot of dirty signal and a very distorted overall image. You don't want this happening because your surround isn't capable of letting that piston move to its full extent and play the entire frequency range. This is where you'll run into distortion on the lows whenever lows are hitting on those mid-range drivers. You start hearing them getting the dirt. It's because they can't properly do their job. Also, a material that's not nice and rigid, strong, will tend to be floppy as it moves. And that also adds all sorts of color and dirt to the sound, and you don't want that. These drivers are stacking up to be something that shouldn't have either of those problems. They handle 75 watts RMS. They've got a nice frequency response range from 60 to 2K, and we're going to take care of that below 60. That's not a problem. They're 3 ohm drivers, and we're going to take that into consideration with an 88.9 sensitivity, and their top mount depth is only 2.36 inches. So they have a 2-year warranty. They come from a reputable manufacturer, and they have all the correct specs. They're $250 a pair. You're going to need 2 pair for this system. And I suggest doing the rear fill in this car. I normally am not a big fan of rear fill, but in this particular scenario, in a car similar to this, I would absolutely do the rear fill. It's going to make a difference in your overall low end output, and it's going to sound much more spacious, much more like being in a club. Be a good sound in this car. For the subwoofer situation. Now, there is a pretty sizable storage space in the back of this car. You could do a lot back there. We're going to have about 1,000 watts to work with. So if you decide you wanted to go with a larger enclosure or different enclosure from what I'm looking at, and you want to use the same build, figure about 1,000 watts RMS at 1 ohm on whatever you're running. Having said that, what I chose is the Kicker 48VCWR122. That's a lot of numbers and letters, What it means is it is a ported enclosure with a 12-inch CompR subwoofer. It handles 500 watts RMS at 2 ohms, which is perfectly suited for the amplifier's output at 2 ohms. It makes 500 watts RMS. So the likelihood of it being overpowered for the subwoofer is, that's just not going to happen. And of course, you're running through the DSP, so you can adjust all those things and keep it in check. And life will be good. It's perfect for this setup. Its frequency response range is from 25 up to 500 hertz with a 90.8 dB sensitivity. So its sensitivity is very similar to the sensitivity of the front and rear drivers. This should make them all line up pretty good. If you set this guy up to cut off at, say, 80 hertz, so you know, no bottom crossover, and then cross it over at 80 hertz, or Linkwitz Riley with a 24 dB roll off, and then the front and rear drivers to cross over at 80 hertz, Linkwitz Riley with a 24 dB roll off, and then take them all the way to infinity. This will be a solid setup just by itself. I don't think there's any need to add any tweeters. Now, this car comes with 4 tweeters, 2 in the front, 2 in the rear. We're not going to be using them. You don't have to take them out. You don't have to change them. Just leave them in there and don't hook them up. It's real simple. If you decide you want to go back to factory at some point and pull these drivers out, you can put the factory cones right back in there, hook the little tweeters up, and everything will be Bob's your uncle. And the reason I chose this particular subwoofer, well, there's a bunch of reasons. It matched the power output that I had to work with. The 12 was going to give a good response in the car, be a good heavy, a little overpowered. So you'll be able to dial it back and get that extra bass if you're one that likes a lot of it, or you can dial it back and get more, a more linear, even bass response. I think for sound quality, it'll be brilliant. And for a little boom in the butt, it'll do that too. The beauty of this is I'm pretty sure this is 23 inches wide, 16 inches tall, and 14 inches deep on the bottom, and 11 inches deep on the top. So the main dimensions we're worried about is 14 inches, is 23 wide and 16 high. And I'm pretty sure that will fit in that little notch in the trunk between the humps, right up against the back seat, and give us a lot of trunk space still available. The nice tucked in sub that'll fit right in there and be nice and smooth and cool. And overall, a good compromise between space and power and ability. Lastly, we're going to talk about the amplifier. And the amplifier is the Recoil Audio 1800 5-channel amp. I've used it on several builds because it works. It's got all the right power in all the right places and all the right abilities to do all the right things. It also gives you that 1 ohm stable output at the ass, so you can hook up that sub and then run it at 500 watts. You can hook up 2 of them and run them at 1,000 watts. You could add a second sub just like that one. You could run any series you want. Just keep it around 500 watts RMS per subwoofer, you know, or 1,000 watts RMS if you got one, you know, heavy duty sub. Rock and roll. But it's got to be wired at 1 ohm, of course, to get that 1,000 watts. The flexibility of this is good. The sound quality will be great. The ease of installation will be really, really good. All in all, I think this is a good setup for the Honda. And I hope you guys enjoyed the video. And if you did, please hit the little circle, because I need the subscribers. This is my way of making a living these days, and subscribers equals income. Anyway, guys, peace.